Welcome to the Science and Beers podcast with me, Mick Mickey. Talking science and drinking beers with researchers down at the pub. We cover a new topic each episode, so join us with a brew and let's cheers to science. Normally in this podcast we talk about science while we drink beer. The two are not normally interconnected, but this week we are getting into the science of beer with master brewer Klaus Christensen. Klaus has a PhD from the University of Copenhagen and he works here in Odense, Denmark, making his own beer at the Munkebo Brewery. I met up with him last night down at his bar and we talked about his beer making process, how he finds the yeast to make his beer, and we just had a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoy. Let us know what you think. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and check out the Munkebo Brewery if you're living in Odense. Klaus Christensen, thank you very much for joining me in the Science of Beers podcast. We are standing here at Odense Harbour outside your brewery, the Munkebo Brewery.
Well, actually, it's first it will be a distillery and then we will have a system for brewing.
First it's a distillery.
We are brewing other places right now, but our distilling system, which we can talk about later, is almost half done. So we will distill in oak barrels and making gin and whiskey here, and then we will brew when the system comes for brewing later.
But you do have beer here at the moment?
Oh yeah, lots of beer. I just brew it another place.
And we're going to be talking about beer. We're going to be talking about the science of beer.
Was that today?
Can we go inside and have a tour of the place?
Oh yes, yeah.
So the place is right beside the water, right beside Odense Canal. We're just looking over the industrial part of the city. It's a beautiful evening. Maybe one of the last of the year.
Let's hope there's a little bit more.
Let's
squeeze a little bit more out of it.
So as you walk into the Munkebo Brewery, you're just stricken by all things that feel that they're coming from a Viking age. There's a little, 4-foot high sculpture of a Viking. Who's made this?
It was made by a sculptor in another part of this island, but actually it's the innovation prize from the old place in Catamine, because they gave it to me because I isolated yeast from the surface of a honeybee for brewing beer, and then they gave me a 1 meter high Viking in oak.
So hang on a minute, just for the listener, the sculpture of the Viking looks a little bit like the dwarf from Lord of the Rings. Yeah. But you just said that you got this as a gift because you took yeast from the honeybee's legs to make beer.
Yeah, it's the oak tree from the village of my father. It was a coincidence. But actually it's because in Munkebo 1,000 years ago we have the Viking king of this area, just like a big hall. So they imagined how he could look like and how I look like, and then they mixed it into this Viking.
I must say, Klaus, you do strike me as a Viking. You know, you're a tall man, you got a great big hairy beard. Yeah. It's covered up at the moment with a face mask because we're standing up.
A small funny story.
Pardon?
A small funny story. I researched a little bit of my ancestors, and actually a line of my father's, but actually going to Bornholm, as a south of this island, Bornholm, then Norway, and then he went to Iceland and be one of the first settlers of Iceland, and going a little bit back. Do you remember the history of Beowulf?
I saw a movie, Beowulf.
Yeah, it was actually through Viking kings in Lejre, Roskilde, and it was actually a line from my ancestors on my father's side.
So you're proper, authentic, 100% Viking.
As good as it gets.
As good as it gets, and proper exploring Vikings as well. I wonder if your ancestors made some mead or beer up in Iceland.
Oh yeah. Do you remember actually when do you know the history when Ragnar was attacking Paris?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
My ancestors was there too.
Ragnar Lothbrok.
However, there was a German Markgraf which was killed by Ragnar. So I was not at the Viking side in this battle. Oh.
You know your ancestry. I want to go over here because this looks really interesting, Klaus. So we're standing in front of 2 tree barks. They've been stripped. They're lying down horizontally, and they've had the insides hollowed out, just leaving one side open. So it's almost like 2 large troughs Can you tell me what's going on here, Klaus?
Actually, it was one day I tried to imagine how did a Viking beer taste. And in the beginning of the Viking age, they didn't have enough metal to make a pot to make beer. So they did extremely old-fashioned way. They took just like a oak tree, and they hollowed it out so there could be water inside. So in the beginning, they put water in the hollow oak trees, and they heated it up with stones. So they make a fire, and with granite stones, they put the stones in the water. So they actually heated the water up with stones, with heated in fire. And then when the water was hot, they put in barley and malt, and then it was crushed, of course, and extracted all the sugar. And then they took another oak tree, which was filled with juniper branches, and they filtered the mash back to the other one. And then they added the yeast from the nature. So they could actually brew, they could brew beer in hollow oak trees. And we copied it some years ago, and we do it maybe one per year. But we took barley and we mashed it in. Then we filtered it over a floor of juniper branches and what do you call it? Mellowwood. It's woodworm, and then the bark from birch tree. It actually
woodworm.
Woodworm, yeah.
Yeah.
And can you translate? It's birkebark.
Birkebark, birch.
Yeah, birch tree bark. Yeah, and actually, if you make tea of this bark, it actually tastes of strawberries. So
it's a bit depending on the wood that you use. The liquid comes
everything
out with a different flavour. So if you were stuck in the forest with just an axe, then you could make your own beer.
Yeah.
Yes. Excellent. I'm going to take a picture of this and I'll share it on the group. This is a huge, almost kind of warehouse place we have here with this beautiful old wood everywhere. And you have a load of beers over there on tap as well, Klaus.
We can go to this one.
Pardon?
My distillery is half done.
Can we see the distillery?
Yeah, of course.
We'll just walk past
Music.
Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam there. So we're walking out the back of the brewery here.
So this is actually... So just if you imagine a distillery is more or less like a big copper pot or stainless steel pot with a stainless steel pot or a copper pot on top. But we are in for recycling, so everything is as recycled as possible. So instead of buying a big copper pot, I bought 2 barrels of 500 liters from a Spanish wine castle. And then I'm going to transform this vessel with heated element from the bottom. And I will put a copper and a stainless steel top on it, and then I will actually distill in wooden oak barrels.
So whenever I saw distilleries before, they're usually huge copper barrels, but this looks like we're going back a couple of hundred years in the kind of method here.
Yeah.
Which is really, it looks really authentic. I'm standing beside a massive barrel here. I'll take a picture of this as well. And what are you making in this, Klaus?
So right now I'm putting it together. I've got all the parts and putting it together in all, so everything would work together. And then I will start making gin in this one. And when we get our brewing system in the wintertime, I will make whiskey and absinthe and eau de vie. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Eau de vie, rum, everything tequila, whatever can be distilled, we will do it. Watermelon brandy. Let me see, rhubarb brandy.
That sounds pretty good to me. That sounds like a lot of fun you're going to have right here. And this looks like a proper science experiment on over here. We got some conical flasks over here, and
yeah, this is actually just I made some media for my yeast. They are actually just standing in my desk, just waiting to be used.
Okay. So I'm looking at 7 different half-liter jars.
Yeah, they are.
Various shades of
they have been sterilized, so the interior is sterilized. So I use it for media. It's more or less just malt media with a little bit of sugar, and it's just completely sterile, so nothing will grow in it. And then I add flowers into this one, so I see what is growing on the surface of flowers.
Ah, okay. So you have the
This is just the media.
you have the standard media, and then you throw in some things where you think there might be an interesting yeast.
And let's see what happens.
That's really cool. That's proper science to me. I want to go back outside and talk to you because I know that you do come from a science background. And this is science and beers. There's about 12 men back there chanting some kind of Viking chant. I don't know what they're doing. They're all drinking beers and acting all Viking-y. If this was 1,000 years ago, as an Irish person, I'd be very nervous. Klaus, we're sitting here outside the Munkeberg Brewery. I am drinking an extravaganza beer from Amaya. Amaya, yeah. What are you on?
This is White Knight.
Yeah.
It's a session IPA from Ale Farm in Greve.
Yeah.
Just like high in hops, low in alcohol, and extremely rich in taste.
Cheers to that.
Skål.
This is almost fruity, almost cidery in its taste, actually.
Yeah, this one is made with like a farmhouse ale and a mix of different yeasts, giving it a quite unique taste.
So, I'm looking at the glass here, and it's a branded glass, the Munkeberg Brewery. This is Yggdrasil.
Yeah, Yggdrasil, yeah.
Yggdrasil.
Ask Yggdrasil.
Is that the Viking tree of life? Can you tell me what Yggdrasil is?
Yeah, it's actually it's a tree of life. Just like in every elf movie, they have a big tree.
Yeah.
I think they got it from somewhere. So, but the Vikings have just like one big world tree connecting everything, all the 9 worlds.
There's 9 worlds in the Viking.
Yeah, black elves, white elves. There's Midgard where we are living, and there's a lot of them.
So I come down here with the intentions of talking about beer and brewing, but I think you can give a proper science and beers talk about Vikings as well. You're from a long 1,000 years descendants of Vikings, and you seem to know a lot about them as well.
Oh yeah, it's when I'm running as a CEO, there's a lot of questions to handle all the time. But when I have a half an hour, I just dive into my ancestors and see what they do, just to get my mind away, and then I'm back.
Exactly.
So I intend a little bit of. It's funny, it's relaxing, and then go to see what my ancestors did.
Yeah, that's a nice little mindfulness trick whenever things are too busy.
Yeah.
It focuses you back again, grounds you, and you seem to be inspired as well because a lot of the beers that you make yourself. Have Viking names like Ragnarok and things like that. So,
yeah, when I started up my brewery about 7 years ago, I went into what should this brand do, what should it name, and when I was walking around in a local warehouse or store, everything was in English, and even though that English is more or less the universal language, why should we tell the story of a different place when we have so much to talk about just around the corner if you just look for it? So in our small town we have the Viking king 1,000 years ago before he moved to this part of the island. So why not tell this story? What about and again, if we don't use our history in our present time, then it becomes history and not living. So everything should be used or it's worthless.
That's a beautiful story there. You need to keep the memory of times gone by alive. You need to keep the memory of your ancestors alive. If we can't learn from history, if we don't know history, we can't learn from history.
Yeah, and then don't repeat the bad ones and repeat the good ones.
Exactly. So luckily the Vikings are not sailing over to Ireland on raids anymore.
I think that the northern part of Ireland was Norwegian, I think, Vikings.
Norwegian Vikings?
I think so, yes.
Okay,
they
so
tested the DNA.
I shouldn't have any beef with Danish Vikings. It's the Norwegians.
And I think that what they call the Shetland, the outer island of Scotland, I think this also what directed as the Vikings from Norway.
Well, there you go. There you go. Well, I'm turning it around. I'm coming over to Scandinavia now. Klaus, you're a master brewer. You have your own brand of beer here, but you come from a science background. You have a PhD.
Yes.
In what?
It's in health science, but I have a master degree in biology, just like you. But I don't know if people know it, but there's two kinds of biologists. The one who works in the lab and the one that works in nature.
Yeah. The one with the rubber boots in the bucket.
Which one are you?
It's the rubber boots in the bucket.
I'm the other one.
Okay.
I'm the biologist working in the lab, just like investigating cells and proteins and making changing the DNA of yeast cells. Just investigating, for example, how does cancer cell interact. So biologists can make a lot of different things.
I firmly believe that more biologists would make the world a better place.
Yeah. So, but if you just like pause there a little bit and go back in my history, my family come from the small farms of the island, which always have been brewing beer. So first you have to be a pharmacist or a chemical engineer, and then you can build up 1.5 2 years, and then you could be a brewmaster. But I took a master degree in biology, and then instead of making a master brewer, I got a PhD from the faculty. So I took my PhD in protein chemistry, molecular biology, and cell biology. And after some time, I always know I have to go into the private area. So after I finished my PhD, I worked as a sales and protein manager for a company making recombinant proteins, polymerase. Do you know what it is?
Polymerase is an enzyme.
Yeah, it's more like a copy machine making more copies of paper.
Yep.
Yeah, this is just like this polymerase making more copies of DNA.
Like the polymerase chain reaction. So
yeah. So for example, if you get a hair or blood sample from a crime scene, you can actually multiply the DNA, cut it in smaller pieces, and it is unique for every person. So this polymerase is just like a copy machine.
Okay, it can take a little bit of something and make it into a lot.
Yeah. So this is just, but I did this for about 1 year, and it got a little bit too me sitting down in the office. It was not a yin-yang situation. So I was just having too much energy. So I actually took a job as a brewmaster at a smaller brewery on Death Island, and I was there.
Excuse me, Death Island?
This island.
This island, okay. Okay, sorry.
In Denmark, there's 200 islands or something, I think. So, and after I was there 1 year, I was actually hired as a head braumeister, as a head brewer in a very small brewery in Bavaria. It's south of München.
That's a good place for beer.
Oh yeah, it's the best. So there's like south of München in the mountains, where all men was wearing lederhosen and all the females were wearing dental. So it was absolutely a perfect place. Yeah. It was a small brewery just next to the mountains. You could see snow on the top. It was a river. It was an old mill. It was the best job ever. Uh-huh. I was just under the CEO, which in German is Geschäftsführer. But since I have a PhD, they call me Herr Doctor, which it took some getting used to. Uh-huh. So I'm trying to educate my people here in Denmark to call me doctor, but there's a little bit. It takes some practice. So
well, that sounds like a nice time in your life there, and especially to learn the trade of being a master brewer.
Yeah. So I gave them Danish science, and I upgraded the volume and make the fermentation more perfect, and they gave me the tradition of brewing beer in Bavaria, which is 1,000 years old.
Indeed. So that sounds like a good trade mix there. Yeah. And then I guess you decided to leave there at some point. And
yeah, I had my family back in Denmark, so I couldn't. I missed my wife and my kids too much.
Of course, yeah.
I couldn't bring them there because the dialect was not German; it was Bavarian. It was mountain dialect, so it took me months to learn, just understand it a little bit.
Yeah. But you came back to Odense and decided to
starting up my own brewery. So I started with my own system, but it was quickly too old and too it was simply just too wet down. So they was sold away. So I started brewing different places until my company was strong enough and big enough to find a good place and buy our own systems, which we are here right now.
I told people on social media that I was meeting up with you today, and Anders asks if you could share your process about collecting yeast.
Yeah, if you take it from the beginning, as biologists, yeast is everywhere in nature. Even as we are Homo sapiens, even though we have Homo sapiens cells in us, we have more yeast and bacteria cells in us than Homo sapiens. So yeast is everywhere, especially where there's sugar. So we just have to go in nature and find them. So if you imagine that yeast cells have more or less the same building materials as us, they can make a lot of different things, just like alcohol. But if you see it from a practical side, yeast don't have wings, yeast don't have legs, so they cannot move from place to place. So they found out a perfect, brilliant way to do it. They secrete fruit esters with aroma of banana, raspberry, apple, and so if you a banana fly, you just come by. It's like, oh, there's something. No, there's nothing. But then they actually move yeast cells from a place to another place because they smell of what they want to find. So this is a perfect place way for yeast cells to be moved around. So this one we use in brewing. So if we want to have a beer that tastes of cherry, we find the yeast cells with the aroma of cherry. Mm-hmm. Do you know a beer called Paulaner or Erdinger?
That's like a rice beer.
Yeah. Yep. This one is made with a yeast with an aroma, fruit ester, with a fruit ester called isomyl acetate, and it's just like the aroma of banana.
So whenever the yeast is the particular yeast is making this aroma, does its food matter?
So can you repeat?
The yeast that has an aroma of cherries.
Yeah.
In Poland, does it matter what the yeast is eating?
No, actually you can find it everywhere, but I have to just like, if you imagine a field of flowers, there's millions on millions of yeast, and maybe there's 2 which can be used. So it's that difficult to find a yeast. There's almost, have you heard of anyone who's just like having success of finding yeast cells in nature to brewing beer?
Well, you?
Yeah, but but I have my academic background to thank for it, because it's my mentor, what I've looked up to is Louis Pasteur. He's also a biologist, just like us. But he found
from the 18th century.
Yeah. But I'm using the same technique as he does. I'm using the way he found out 200 years ago. I'm using exactly the same way. I'm just looking for something else. He was looking to purify yeast and bacteria. I'm looking for a way to find the one yeast in a field of billion of yeasts which can be used. And I'm doing this by collecting flowers, putting them into medium, just like letting them grow. Let's see what happens. And the media is selective. For example, if I want to looking for wine yeast, I was using grape as media. Mm-hmm. If I'm looking for a cider yeast, I was looking apples. But right now I'm using barley as a media because I want this one to grow on maltodextrin. So actually I was...
So you're looking for a yeast that can take the barley and turn it into alcohol and sweet smelling aromas.
Yeah, to remember that I told you the part about aroma.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of small jars with a green beer, which is like sterile beer. Then I add a flower. But beer yeast have a perfect aroma. So actually wait a little bit, and when it grows up, I just like use my nose to smell it. If it smells bad, it's like out. Mm-hmm. If it smells great, I continue. Mm-hmm. This is the first step. So I actually have lots of jars, just like use my nose to smell which one smells great, and this one I continue selecting and purifying and making experiments.
So that's interesting. Say in that example, on that flower there's going to be countless different strains of yeast. And so whenever you get that smell, you're not sure which particular strain is making that.
No.
So how do you then continue that and refine it and identify which strain is
I'm
making
using more or less the same technique as Louis Pasteur.
your nose.
No, this is one. Yeah, but more or less because that for the first, one of the ingredients of my media is hops. Hops is antiseptic, which means that bacteria is difficult to grow in it. Not impossible, but difficult. Then I add alcohol, which then again, it's for non-alcohol producing yeast or bacteria is difficult to grow. And then I'm using thyme because that there's another yeast you'd make wild yeast, Brettanomyces lambicus, for example, but they divide so slowly. It takes about 3 weeks for them to grow, if they grow just like naturally. But standard beer yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, they divide 1 per hour. So they are extremely fast dividing and can grow fast. So if I see a fast fermentation just like from day to day, by the hour, and it tastes great, the chance of it being a beer yeast, which is beer, my media is selecting for beer yeast. And if you add the factor of aroma, and if you add the factor of time, you have an extremely high chance of finding beer yeast. If you put it all together.
Yeah.
Plus another, I have some more things I always forget when people ask me.
What more things do you have?
I have more selecting career, but I always forget when people are asking me.
You're not going to share them, are you?
I'm sharing a lot, but I'm not sharing everything.
Of course not. Of course not. So you mentioned the yeast on honey bee legs earlier on. Did you use the same process for that? Did you
Yes.
like scrape the little tiny
yes and
legs?
no. Actually, it was I was starting a project there was March in Denmark, and there's nothing in Denmark in March, no apples, no berries, no flowers. There's absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So actually, there was the other place where we was 2 years ago, and I remember that I was looking for somewhere to find yeast. So I remember that the old lady next door is making honey. So and when I was a master student, I remember an article where ants was making collaboration with they collected leaves. They took leaves down in their ant
colony, yeah.
Yeah, and then they actually used yeast to ferment the leaves into sugar. So actually ants had collaboration with yeast. So why shouldn't bees have collaboration? So I looked in the scientific articles, and there was absolutely no one who has ever investigated what kind of microbiology is the surface of bees. But in my head, the hypothesis was actually, it just gave sense even though no one have done it before. So I actually said if yeast is everywhere, and they are where there is sugar, and bees are where there is sugar, just why shouldn't they transfer around on yeast?
That's a wonderful scientific mind there.
So I just I borrowed about 10 bees. Asta got stung about 5 times. I feel really bad.
Who's that?
Asta was the old lady.
Okay.
Yeah. I was like, Asta, I'm going to look for bee yeast, as a yeast on your honeybees. Can I borrow 10 bees? So it's like, oh yeah, sure. So she caught about in the hand 10 bees, and I put them. Do you know what a petri dish is?
Yes.
So actually,
It's like a circular glass jar
with media with agar, so it's solid.
Agar, yep.
So actually, on each petri dish there was a bee, and the bee was jumping around and was really angry, especially because I shook it a little bit. So after a couple of hours, I actually let the bee go, and actually I never saw a bee again. I'm not so yeah, but actually after some weeks, about 1 week, actually just imagine the bee is everywhere in the flower, and they actually collected what they're collecting on the hairs, on the legs, on the wings, everywhere you have yeast and bacteria. So when they were jumping around, the dust on the surface of the bees was going around on the petri dish, as a falling down on the petri dish. So actually, I could see in the footsteps of where the bee was jumping around, there came yeast colonies. And then I actually I harvest them and put them into a jar and start growing them. And then I actually, it took a half year, and I isolated about 4 different strains of yeast, with the first one have a perfect aroma of banana.
Uh-huh.
So I could make a German Weissbier with a yeast from a honeybee. Number 2 have perfect aroma of raspberry. So actually, in French it's called eau de vie de framboise, which in Danish, in Danish is hindbærfrugtbrændevin, and in English is raspberry spirit.
Uh-huh.
As a raspberry brandy, maybe. And then number 3 have aroma of apple, so I could use it for cider. And number 4 have got the ketones and just the same as aroma as a Belgian yeast used for making a double and a triple.
Wow.
And this is just at 1 temperature, because if I change the temperature, the aroma of the yeast is changed.
The aroma or the actual dominant strain of yeast?
No, it's the same yeast, just for each temperature, the aroma of what it secretes is different. So if you take the yeast with an aroma of raspberry at 26 degrees and use it at 20 degrees, it's neutral and can be used, for example, for whiskey.
That's amazing, that. So I want to go back and talk more about this aroma, because you seem to suggest earlier on that the yeast they would benefit from producing an aroma like that, because it would attract like bees or ants or humans.
Yeah, it's my theory that this is just, for example, another thing that yeast is perfect for is like they're making alcohol. So yeast found out that if they have air, they can just live and produce. However, they found out if they make a pathway and there's no air, they can actually make sugar into alcohol. They can make sugar into alcohol, and the byproduct is they can make sugar and live of it, and the byproduct is carbon dioxide and alcohol. Mm-hmm. But this is made without any kind of air. So they can live with air, they can live without air. Mm-hmm. So if we put yeast and we put oxygen into the yeast, they will grow and multiply. If we stop giving them yeast, they will stop multiplying, but then they will make alcohol.
And when do they produce these aromas? Is it whenever there's no oxygen?
It's a mix.
It's a mix.
Because when they grow and they multiply, they make something called coenzyme A. It's a middle product. And when in the end they build up this compound when they're dividing and growing. So when they are finished and there's no sugar, no anything, they make this product into a food ester.
So if we're walking around and we see an apple lying on the ground and it started to rot, or a banana, and it's got that beautiful aroma, and it started to ferment, you know, it's yeast that is attacking the fruits and breaking it down.
Yes, and for example, in the old days, you just think about wine. So you remember the old days when they took grapes, put it in an extremely big barrel, and just crushed it, and on the surface of the grapes there was plenty of just it's a beer yeast. Wine yeast and beer yeast is the same. Mm-hmm. So there was plenty of fermenting yeast.
So all they needed to do was crush the grapes and just leave it.
Then wait.
Yep.
So they are simply.
Well, they were also doing it in their bare feet as well. So you might have had some dirty feet yeast.
They actually they contain a lot of yeast too.
Yeah.
So it was but it's a factor which is not very known, but it's also give character to the wine.
Yeah.
But no one wants to hear it.
Indeed. That.
So can I tell you a story?
I'd love to hear your story.
If I give you something, can you explain what you see and feel?
So what I'm holding in front of me, it looks like some kind of, I'm sorry to say it, like, but an artist's depiction of like a crown of thorns made of wood, made of what are these clothes pegs? So it would fit around my head. It's like a circular thing. You can hear it there. I'm rattling it.
It's.
But I have no idea what.
Have you never seen it before?
I've never saw it before. No.
It's a yeast ring.
A yeast ring.
Yeah, if you imagine this is just like a standard puzzle which your kids make.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just like you have. It's just like one brick, but they're all the same and they're collected. So they make a ring, of a puzzle wooden ring, which the surface is extremely large. So in this yeast ring, it goes actually. I've seen it back to the 16th century. 1600.
Uh-huh.
So about 400 years ago, I've seen this in the museums. So this is actually because it's a wooden ring. It's a great way to keep yeast between brewing.
So how do you do you just like scrape?
Yeah.
On?
Actually, first, if you imagine this one is covered with yeast, so you use it by taking a string, because if you touch it, the lactobacillus from your hands is going to affect the beer. Mm-hmm. So you never touch it, but you touch using a string. So you put it into your brewed beer. It's cooled down. You put the wooden ring, the gærkrans, the kveikring. You put it into the beer, and the yeast is perfectly capable of drying out and reviving again. Mm-hmm. So it comes to life and it's fermenting the beer. So then you take the yeast ring up and you clean it, you sterilize it by hot water, and when the beer is finished, you put it back, and the yeast slowly settles back on the yeast ring, and you take it up and put it in a safe space and dry it until next time.
And the yeast can just sit there dormant for, if need be, hundreds of years.
No, but they can sit. You more they use it, you fresh they are, because every day a straw.
Did they not go into like some kind of?
They are, but someday every day a little bit of yeast is dying.
Okay.
So you more you use it, the more fresh it is. So actually, there's a little bit. If you go back in science, you can actually, if you imagine this yeast ring is from the 1600s, but the design before was actually a cane, and in the end of the cane there was crafted holes and mosaic and sculptures, so the surface was big, and if the surface is big, it can carry a lot of yeast. Mm-hmm. So if you go back about 3,000 years, so if you imagine there's about a big pot, and you have druids. Do you know Miraculix?
Druids. We had druids in Celtic.
Yes.
In Celtic history.
So what did the druids have?
What did they have? Beer?
Yes, actually, it's, but they, miraculous have magic.
They have magic.
Yeah. So actually, do you think magic can make things to life? So if you imagine that actually they have a magic wand, and the magic wand was blessing the brew, and it made to life.
Yes.
So
and the yeast was on the magic wand.
Yes. So
wow.
Actually, if you put this, it was not a magic cane. Okay, it was a yeast cane. What they didn't tell anyone that the cane containing yeast was actually giving life to the brew, and therefore when people didn't understand what was happening, they called it magic.
That might be where the modern magic wand comes from.
Exactly.
The Celtic druids making beer.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So actually, do you know
Mind
what?
blown.
Can you see the connection now?
Yes, 100%.
So why does Harry Potter have a magic wand?
Because he wants to make a beer.
Yeah.
It's got yeast on top of it.
Yes.
The yeast are the magic.
Yes.
The yeast are the
are
magic. The yeast are the magic. That's fantastic, Klaus. Cheers to that.
That's cool.
That's cool. So, you're talking about people 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago making beer, but they didn't have microscopes. They didn't know that it was the yeast. Like, you're clearly a man who's really looked into his history and thought about his ancestors. What do What could they have been thinking 1,000 years ago whenever they're making beer?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm allowed to tell. It's a bit kinky. But you can cut it off. But actually, it's because it in the Viking area, because of it was giving life. They actually called it the semen of Odin.
Beer?
No, yeast.
The yeast?
The white stuff giving life to beer was the semen of Odin.
How did they? So I imagine it's a bit like making sourdough bread. They had this kind of like bowl with just this like ugly looking stuff just left there to like grow, and then they did what you're doing in there with the horizontal hollowed out oak, and they had their ingredients in there, and then they threw in the semen of Odin.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I heard a story. I was sitting in the bar in Lithuania, in Vilnius, and there was a story about. It was 100 years old. It was a story about a brewer going in a trip. He was going in the forest, and you know when the tree is bleeding, there's a little bit of sugar coming out, and this tree was actually there was foam. No, the English word is not foam. It's
sap.
No. The foam of a beer. What do you call it? You call it. You cannot call it foam. You call it froth.
The froth. Yeah.
Also, the froth of the sap of the tree was. There's a lot of. Okay, I'm sorry. I call it foam again. This word is so difficult for me to pronounce.
Froth.
So there was foam on this sap. There was tree. So the brewer knew instantly there was yeast. So he took some of the foam with him home, put it into green beer, and instantly it started brewing beer and converted it into alcohol. So this was the best beer brewing yeast he ever had, and it still lives today, 100 years after. So again, yeast is everywhere. You have to look for it. So this actually inspired me for look for yeast in nature, because you just have to look for it, then it's there.
Where's the next place you're going to be looking?
If you imagine we are at the harbor, at the inner harbor, and just across, there's about maybe 50 meters across. It's quite narrow where we are right now. It's getting better on the inner side, but on the other side there is actually a lot of trees. There was a beautiful castle there 500 years ago.
Okay.
And this castle where actually there was when the king and queen would travel around in Denmark, they actually have big castles everywhere, and they lived at these castles when they was controlling the country. So Nesbyhul's castle was just like 400 meters from where we are right now, but it was burned down 500 years ago, and there's nothing left but a big hill. Yeah. So on this big hill there's lots of flowers, trees, everything. But actually when I went up there, there was lots of blackberries. And blackberries, of course, they come from flowers. So I was picking a lot of flowers from blackberry and putting it into small jars with media. And some of them started to grow. Some of them smelled badly, which was just like thrown away. But I still have a lot of jars left, which is from flowers from blackberries, and they smell absolutely amazing. So actually, there's, I think. What the aromas is now is a little bit too early, but I think I found aroma of apricot and peach and raspberry and a lot of different things. Because now they're still a mix; they're not pure yet.
Not only does that sound delicious, it draws with what you've been talking about this evening, which is like look at history, bring in history there. So you're going over to the actual settlement of the old king from 500 years ago, and you're getting your yeast from the remains of the old burnt out fort.
Yeah, but this is a part of Odense, which also not everyone in Odense know there's actually a king castle which used to be there, which controlling this part of the island. So now we can tell this story too.
I like the fact that you're using beer to tell history, because this podcast uses beer to talk about science.
Yeah, and beer brings good memories and good friends and lots of talks. So it's I think it's a good mix.
I think so.
So if you combine history, if you combine science, if you combine the story of beer, you can actually find connections everywhere when people haven't seen them before, but they are so logic when people have seen that magic is actually science.
It's the beautiful connections you're talking about. It's about how the yeast and the ants are working together. You know, it's about the bees and the yeast that are attracting the different insects and aromas, and about how all of this came together for you to extract the yeast and for us to be enjoying these delicious beers right here.
Yeah.
The world is totally connected, and a lot of those connections are totally invisible, and that's what you call the magic.
Yeah,
But with science and the microscope,
they come forward.
exactly. Klaus, thanks very much for joining me in the Science of Beers podcast. It was an absolute pleasure.
It was wonderful to be invited.
Thank you.
My last comment is when we closed down for renovation now, but maybe a year from now, you can stand in one place. You can see beer is brewing, beer is fermenting, beer is serving from tanks, and everything is being done with a yeast I found on the flower of a blackberry, just like 400 meters here, a place where the king used to live.
That's fantastic. For those of you listening in Odense, come on down to the Munkebo Brewery. It is on the right side of the harbour as you're coming down from the city. The address is
Møllekajen 5.
Møllekajen 5. And you're open from when to when, Klaus?
Right now, the opening times is changing all the time, but
Yeah,
it's
because
from
of
Thursday to Saturday.
The great pandemic.
It takes about 10 minutes to go here from the train central and a half an hour to go back.
But it's you have a lot of outdoor seating here next to the beautiful view. I'm looking up at the half moon at the moment. That's just drifting past the big silo on the island over there. You can see the lights of the city. What a wonderful place you have here, Klaus.
Thank you.
Let's get another beer. Hope you enjoyed that episode of the Science and Beers podcast. I certainly enjoyed recording it. If you're in Odense, make sure you come check out the brewery. If you're not in Odense, I still hope you learned something from that episode. Please consider supporting this podcast. You can do that at patreon.com/science and beers. Thanks for listening.